Hello again. Yeah, I know it doesn't seem like I've done much, and actually I have not. I did not like the placement of my eyes, so I moved them. I think they are better now. But of course, when I moved them, I had to erase what I did, partly. So I erased and I redid it. Yeah, it's never ending. Anyway, that's why it looked like I have done nothing. This being said, now I have to continue to do or to redo what I've done. Where is that thing?
So cold, and he shivered the gunk from the insides of his lung, and he spat up ugly matter. On the 10th, he was in South Florida, riding his first roller coaster, and not really enjoying it. On the 12th, he was near out of money, and the pain in his chest was a constant reminder that it really didn't matter. It hurt to take a deep breath. It felt as though there were sharp-edged diamonds between his ribs that gouged at his innards every time he sucked in air. Coughing made him wince, and he couldn't remember the last time he was hungry. "Guess I'm just about done," he said. "Now it's just a question about how I'm going to go." The people around him on the observation deck pretended they didn't hear the lean and leathery man talking to himself. He was in New York City, even at the top of the Empire State Building. There were crazies. From 1,300 feet up, he watched the sun go down over New Jersey. It was one of the damnedest, prettiest sights he'd ever seen. That evening, he spent watching the people of New York live their lives. It was a bit overwhelming for a man from Norman, Oklahoma, and his head spun at the sheer number of humans going this way and that. The city brought out the best and the worst in people. They laughed over nothing and screeched in anger over less. They were suspicious of strangers, but the love they showed their friends came off them in waves. New Yorkers were so different from him that he felt like an alien being, and yet, at the same time, he could see there were many people just like him, people alone and in pain on the outside of life looking in. The next day, he woke up in a Jersey City motel room with his lungs full of crap and pain that radiated from his chest and up into his shoulder. "Well, shit," he whispered, and then spat out a knob of ugly phlegm. He dry swallowed 6 Advil, and when that didn't do anything, he took 6 more. It barely helped. "And that's why," he said, thinking about his upcoming suicide. Chuck had plenty of life left in him, but nothing to look forward to. He could expect every morning from here on in to be just as bad, if not worse. "Gonna be messy. I don't want to leave a mess."
I'll be back. I'll be back.
I don't want to leave a mess for some poor schlub. That would be straight up rude. And I don't like heights. It was one thing to enjoy the view from the top of one of them skyscrapers. It was another thing altogether to intentionally take a step off of one into nothing. Using a car to gas himself to death seemed as fine a way to go as any, but seeing as he didn't have a car or a garage, that choice was out. Chuck settled on pills as his one-way ticket to heaven, or hell, or whatever it was waiting for him. Not some crappy Advils. He wanted to go out in style, maybe even with a smile on his face. At 10 that morning, he stood in the High Point Oncology Wellness Center, reflecting on the dichotomy between the bright and shiny offices and the gray and listless patients waiting to be told what they already knew, that their remission had been canceled, their funeral date had been moved up, and that their chemo-fueled agony had been a waste of time. I don't have an appointment, ma'am, he said to the brassy woman behind the desk. He tried not to stare, but East Coast women were so strikingly overworked in the looks department that he couldn't help but wonder where the makeup ended and the girl beneath it all began. I just need some pills. My doc is Jeffrey Montgomery out of Norman, Oklahoma. He'll vouch for me. We don't work that way, the receptionist said with a fake smile. Chuck figured that she never wore a real one. Her lips sported 2 different shades of gloss, or liner, or what all. They also seemed unnaturally puffy, as if she was smiling up at him from around a mouthful of ass fat or silicone. A few minutes later, Chuck found himself lying his way through a stack of paperwork. Phone number, first 10 digits that sprang to mind. Address, 1428 Elm Street, the original house in the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. Mother's maiden name, Chia Pet. Secondary diagnosis, EPS, enormous penis syndrome. It was absolutely juvenile, but he didn't care. He needed the laugh. All around him in the waiting room were people waiting to die, and whenever he glanced at them, he wondered if they would end up in the ground, or if they would find themselves in something resembling a brass spittoon on someone's mantle. When he was done bullshitting his way through the paperwork, Chuck stretched out his long legs, shut down his green eyes, and tried to nap, but found that he couldn't because there was a cougher in the room. She would cough, which would give him the urge to shoot one right back. What was worse, she had that same loose phlegm hack that he did. They traded cough for cough until he opened his eyes and saw the source. A very pretty girl. Or rather, she would have been pretty if she weren't in the process of dying. She was tall and pale. Her skin was like white marble. It made the blue of her eyes stand out. On her head was a little acorn cap of soft wool that was girlishly pink. A very short tuft of pale blonde hair stuck out beneath. They locked eyes, and each fought off the urge to cough. It became a contest. Again, so juvenile that Chuck marveled at himself. The girl went pink in the cheeks, started blinking rapidly, and then coughed. Chuck grinned and coughed into the back of his hand. Squamous or small cell? He asked. Small cell, she admitted. He nodded to suggest that he had the same diagnosis. She glanced at the mass of brown hair on his head. Still have your hair. Does that mean you got lucky and they caught it early? Nope, I'm into late innings, and I figured why go through all that crap. My name's Chuck. Nice to meet you. He stuck out his hand. They shook, and he was slow to give up the grip. Her hand was as satiny soft as his was rough and leathery. She didn't seem to mind. I'm Stephanie, and you didn't miss anything. Chemo is as bad as they make it out to be. That's why I've drawn the line. Their handshaking had reached an awkward point, and reluctantly, he pulled his hand back. You throwing in the towel? I like the way you talk, she remarked, instead of answering the question. Are you from Texas? Chuck's eyes blazed in mock fury. Texas? Do I look like a big hunk of bullcrap to you? Next, I reckon you'll be asking me if my family's from France. Is it? She laughed and then coughed. He did the same. Nah, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm out here seeing what all there is to see before I get settled in from a long dirt nap. I should have done that, Steph said, instead of that awful chemo. Of course, my mom wouldn't have let me either way. Here I am, a grown woman, and she treats me like, Well, she treats me like her baby daughter. I know I'm lucky to have her around, except she doesn't know the meaning of the word quit. Right now, she's in there with Dr. Wilson conspiring to send me away to some top secret facility where they have some sort of experiments planned. Experiments? Chuck snorted. Sounds like they got some newbie doctors who need practice with an anal probe. No thanks. They'll just have to wait until I've reached cadaver status. Oh, it's worse than that, Stephanie said. She lowered her voice to a whisper and added, They want to inject a fungus into you. Is that crazy or what? When he started to laugh, she put her hand on his arm and said, I'm not kidding. Oh shit, my mom. Winnie Glowitz, looking small next to the tall doctor, stood in the waiting room doorway staring at Chuck with a great deal of suspicion. Dr. Wilson had a different look. Could you wait out here for a few minutes, Miss Glowitz? I need to talk to this gentleman briefly. Charles Singleton? You're in trouble with the principal, Steph whispered to him as he got up. Chuck flashed her a smile and followed after the doctor. I could have waited a few more minutes, Chuck said as they entered an exam room. Weren't no need to call on me so quick, lad. You thought that was quick? Dr. Wilson asked. You were in that room for over an hour. Chuck shrugged. Some hours are better than others, I guess. With the right company, I would say you're correct. Now, my nurse tells me you're here for pills. Sorry, but we don't work that way. We follow protocols that are designed to... I don't mean to be rude, Doc, but I don't need protocols or chemo or any of that hogwash. I have some pain I need to deal with, so if and you'll just write me a script, I'll be on my way. On your way where? Chuck shrugged in answer, and Dr. Wilson saw right through it. That's what I thought. I've been in the cancer business for over 20 years, and I know when a man is done. You guys get that devil-may-care look in your eyes, and I'm all right with that. Who am I to say when life is no longer worth living? But what about that young woman out in the waiting room? Stephanie? What about her? She's not ready yet, Dr. Wilson answered. I see it. She may talk a good game, but she's not ready to die just yet. She wants to try to live, and I want you to help her. Chuck gave a little laugh that turned into one of his longer coughing fits. Red in the face and gasping, he asked, Help her? How? That fungus business? Are you serious? Look, I don't even know her. Yet you two have a connection, Dr. Wilson said, entwining his long, dark fingers together. It was obvious to me, and it was most certainly obvious to her mom. You both are end-stage cancer patients. You're both staring death right in the mouth, and you're both young and pretty. You'll never meet a girl in a bar with connections that deep. This brought out a laugh from Chuck. I'm not that young. His smile dipped at the corners. He was all sorts of ready to die, but he knew the same couldn't be said for Stephanie. There was too much hope left in her. So, is it this fungus business? Even so, it sounds crazy. I'll make you a deal, Mr. Singleton. Let me explain the clinical trial to you, and if you still want to walk away from this chance, I'll get you your pills and you can go. 20 minutes later, Wilson finished, and Chuck left with his pills. He paused in the waiting room doorway. Stephanie, you want to come take a step around the block with me? I got a question for you. 6. John Burke, Izard County, Arkansas. The pistol, a snub-nosed .38 with a worn handle, sat under his socks in the top dresser drawer. John Burke had checked in on it once an hour for the last 2 days, as if it were a cat ready to drop a litter under the stairs. He sighed with each visit. He sighed and he coughed, but the gun would have to wait for just a little while longer. Pretty soon, Amy. Would she understand? Would Jesus? This was a big concern with John. Suicide was one of those things that didn't sit in a gray area. There wasn't going to be no asterisk next to his name when he was standing at the pearly gates waiting to be let in. I got me some fuck-all extenuating circumstances there, Mr. St. Pete. That wasn't going to fly. John shut the drawer. The time wasn't right. He was still waiting on answers from people who, it seemed, were hell-bent on ignoring him. That he wasn't hearing from friends who'd stopped returning his phone calls months before wasn't surprising. But to be treated like a dog by family, well, that just stung. Downstairs, the kitchen door creaked open. Jamie, he called, suddenly nervous. Although Jamie was a tiny thing, she was never this quiet. Unless... Yes, I'm Daddy. It's me. Something wrong? he asked, hurrying down to the kitchen. There most certainly was something wrong. Jamie was white, and there were tears on her face. "Aunt Kathy came to see me at school," the little girl said. "They took me out of class." It felt like a stone had done sunk deep down in his belly, but he tried to play it cool. "Oh, yeah? Aunt Kathy told me to tell you that I can't come and live with her and that you have to stop calling at all hours. Why am I supposed to go live with her? Is it your cough? Are you going to be like Mommy?" The weight in his gut doubled. "Maybe," he said, chickening out. The manly thing would have been to sit her down and have a chat. Just then, he felt no better than a dog. "When do you go to the hospital?" she asked. Since she could crawl, her life had been one hospital visit after another. The weight in his gut grew. It was such a load that he sat himself at the kitchen table, its one bad leg wobbling as it had for years. "I'm not going to the hospital," he told her. The room went very quiet. "Then how will you get better?" He stumbled over the truth and tripped on lies, and all that came out of his mouth was a series of nonsense sounds. Hey, is that the mail?" She had a little stack of envelopes in her hand. Fuck all bills and crap, he figured. However, the first one was addressed to Amy Lynn Burke. Normally, he would have chucked it without bothering to look inside. But just then, he needed an excuse to not say what needed to be said. "Who's it from?" Jamie asked. She had latched onto the letter as well. It was like a life preserver from reality. "Oh, just some pharmacy. Probably it's a bill or a..." His mouth stopped as his eyes latched onto the sum, $10,000. It sat midway down the paragraph. Was that how much Amy Lynn owed? No, he had to start over again, reading from the top to understand that it was how much they were offering. "Who are these people?" John asked, looking at the front of the envelope. "R&K Pharmaceutical Research." Huh. Chapter 5. One day prior to trial inception. 1. When it came to the labs, Dr. Lee could not have been happier. They were, at least from a scientist's perspective, beautiful. They were very bright, impeccably clean, and fantastically spacious. It was every scientist's nightmare to have to stumble over each other in order to get work done. She had the opposite problem, if problem was even a word for it. Each of her 3 teams buzzed and scuttled about in their own BSL-3 labs, preparing for the first trial, which was less than 24 hours away. She watched through the glass windows, thoroughly satisfied as the final touches were being put to the comm cells. She was so happy she had even been able to give Ryan Deckard a smile when he came scowling into the hospital just after 9 that morning. Though to be sure, she kept it on the cool side. Whenever she gave him a warmer smile, he returned it in the same manner, and there would be a spark or something odd between them. Since she had no intention of getting involved with a coworker, especially one who didn't even possess a master's degree, she kept her interactions on the lean edge of professional. Deckard wasn't happy, not because of the cool attitude Dr. Lee was giving him. She was that way with everyone. No, he wasn't happy about the leak. His informant, Jean Basteau, had been open about where he'd come by his information. A professor of microbiology at Cornell named Ethan Rousseau, who did frequent consultation work for Ronofis, a French competitor of R&K's. The fat bastard had let it slip after 3 too many vodka tonics. As expected, Ethan was not as forthcoming as Jean had been. In fact, Ethan was a dick, in Deckard's opinion. So far, substantial bribes and threats of lawsuits had done nothing to change his mind about talking, and no amount of digging seemed to unearth anything concerning who the leaker was, or how far Ronofis was on their own version of the comm cell. Deckard had run up against a stone wall, but that wasn't his greatest problem. Most of his surveillance system was not yet operational, and no amount of screaming at Hal Kingman would make it so by the following day when the trial would commence. For some reason, Kingman had prioritized the perimeter cameras. Deckard could see every inch of the grounds, which was all well and good, except the biggest threat to the cure was what was going on inside the facility. Not only did he have a double agent to worry about, but there was also a sudden influx of people in the Walton facility. He had the numbers memorized. 42 patients, 61 family members, 8 nurses, 6 doctors of various specialties, 23 members of the cleaning staff, 14 cafeteria workers, 31 management and administrative positions. Counting the 18 scientists, Deckard's 12-man security crew, and the construction workers, who still had so much to do, there were now 257 people crawling like ants all over the grounds. To make matters worse, 3 of the patients were convicted criminals. In order to fill out the study to a respectable number, the recruiter had even scraped the nearby prisons. The prisoners had been secreted in by way of the loading dock and were now housed in the southwest corner of the second floor. That particular room had been picked not because it was any way more secure than the others, but simply because it had the worst view, the side of the parking garage behind the main building. Deckard checked on the prisoners personally. He entered without knocking and stood just inside the door. The room was crowded. A third bed had been crammed in with the original 2, and with it had come 3 portable monitors and an IV stand. There was barely room to walk between the beds. The 3 prisoners perked up when he first entered. "Thought you'd be the hot nurse again," von Braun said, speaking genially. After seeing the view, a gray concrete wall, he had chosen the bed closest to the door, reasoning he was not only closer to freedom, but also closer to the honeys he hoped would be waiting on him hand and foot. Deckard ignored the man. He went to the window, not to check out the view, but rather to inspect the glass and the rubber seal along its edges. With both palms, he pressed hard against the window, leaving 2 ghostly prints behind. Von Braun laughed at him. "You think we want to escape? You ain't too bright. Not only is this place practically a vacation, if we run away, we don't get the fucking cure, moron." Turning from the window, Deckard stared at the hulking blonde prisoner, assessing him, seeing the cold, cold eyes, and noting the lack of emotion behind them. "Check the glass once an hour," Deckard said to the security guard who had followed him in. Strictly for the week-long trial, Deckard had hired 3 extra guards to oversee the prisoners. Each had been chosen for their large size and the easy way violence came naturally to them. The position didn't call for more than that. "We're chained to the fucking beds," von Braun said, lifting his arm halfway up and letting his shackles rattle. "And check the chains as well," Deckard ordered. "And I want to know if there's a single screw loose on any of these beds." "What a dumb fuck," von Braun muttered. He'd been sitting on the edge of the bed. Now he laid back and nuzzled his head into the soft pillow. "Do what you need to do. Just leave the remote and tell that hot young nurse I'm ready for my sponge bath any time." The other 2 prisoners were on the downhill side of middle age. One was gray in the face from his disease and lethargic from the meds. He was so far gone that although he was only 58, Deckard had him pegged in his mid-70s. The other prisoner had a great deal of body hair, but only a few wisps on his round head. He was chubby and sweated easily, even in the thin hospital gown he wore. At the mention of sponge baths, he sat up straighter. "They do that?" he asked. "I could get a bath from one of them?" Deckard's lip curled as an image formed in his mind. "Male orderlies only," he added to the security guard. "That's bullshit!" the hairy prisoner cried. "I'm not a pervert. I got locked up for fraud, not rape. And I got rights. You can count on a lawsuit if you plan on treating me." Dr. Lee stepped into the room, her beauty stopping the conversation cold. She did not advance beyond the doorway as every eye turned her way. "Did someone mention lawsuit already? We haven't even begun the trial." "Don't worry about it," Deckard told her. "Just some whining from the prisoners. That sort of talk never amounts to anything." The hairy prisoner had already forgotten his threat. His mind and his eyes were completely focused on Twee. "Whoa," he said, as though in awe. "Yeah," von Braun agreed with his fellow inmate. "I don't normally go in for the squints, but I'll make an exception for you, Doc. How about you draw the curtain around this bed and give me a full checkup? I have some swelling you might be able to help with." Though Deckard bristled, Twee took the remark in stride. It wasn't the first time a man had made a jackass of himself in her presence. "You are nothing but a lab rat to me, Mr. von Braun. When you've served my purpose, you'll go back to your cage where you belong. Until then, be a good little rat and shut the hell up." "You are a saucy little bitch," the prisoner replied, smiling, enjoying the attention. It had been 8 years since he had even had a conversation with a woman, and just then he had a fully engorged hard-on. Yes, Twee said, drawing out the word, somehow suggesting that von Braun was inadequate by the simple syllable. In case you were unaware of it, Mr. von Braun, your fate is in my hands. If I want you off the study, then you are out of here, and I don't need a judge or a lawyer or a court order either. I simply put a line through your name, and you'll be back in your cell by dinner. That would be a death sentence, von Braun replied. Are you so devoid of emotion that you'd be able to do that? Kill me with a stroke of your pen? Twee didn't hesitate. Yes. So would you like to behave or go back to your cell? The pair locked eyes in a battle of wills, only to be interrupted by the hairy prisoner in the next bed. I'll be good. Herman, too. Don't lump us in with him. She turned her cold glare on him. He blanched and touched the neck of his hospital gown with one of his hairy knuckled hands in a gesture that was strangely dainty. I'll be good as well, von Braun said. You can trust me. He winked at her. As she started to shake her head, her phone began to ring. What? She asked, brushing past Deckard and heading for the door. What emergency do you have for me now? She demanded into the phone just as the door swung shut. Did you see that body? Von Braun asked the other prisoners. Holy shit, that was nice. Deckard gritted his teeth and turned to the guard. Watch them. Anything happens, it'll be your ass on the line. 2. Lieutenant Eng. The construction workers were going at it non-stop, hammering and drilling everything in sight. The nurses were like worker bees going from room to room, drawing blood, hooking up patients to monitors, and filling out charge notes. The scientists were sweating over the outcome of the trial before it even began, and each was checking and rechecking the comm cells, or rereading their notes, or running computer simulations for the umpteenth time. Strangely, the Chinese agent might have been the most relaxed person in the partially built hospital. With the hard part of his mission behind him, he sat at his desk, playing solitaire on his computer and bowing his head like an idiot each time Dr. Lee rushed past. She was being run ragged, responding to every pseudo-emergency that came up. There seemed to be no end to them, and she was no longer the cool professional scientist who had so confidently entered the hospital at dawn 6 hours before. Secretly, Eng laughed at her and couldn't wait to see what she would look like the next day when her precious cure turned deadly. At least, he assumed it would be deadly. When Riggs' possums had been given the alkaloid comm cells, they had gone jian, crazy, fighting through the wire of their cages to get at their brothers and sisters in the control group. Those that got through turned cannibal, gorging themselves until their bellies were swollen and the tips of their whiskers dripped blood. It had been quite disgusting, and yet Eng wanted an even more horrible display. And so, when he sabotaged the trial by switching out the weak fusarium mycotoxin with Riggs' alkaloid version, he tripled the dose. It had not been easy. With Riggs' team in charge of transferring the mycotoxin-bearing organelles into the stem cells, Eng was perfectly positioned to switch out the weaker fusarium for Riggs' far stronger ergot alkaloids. It should have been simple, especially since Riggs barely paid attention to Thing 1 in his own lab and spent as much time as he could next door in Milner's lab, chatting up Anna Holloway. When he wasn't around, Dr. Lee was always right there, asking questions and demanding answers about everything from the incubator temperatures to the pipette sterilization procedures. She wished to oversee every single aspect of the cure and was amazingly, annoyingly meticulous, and had nearly caught Eng on 2 separate occasions in the middle of sabotaging her project. The first time, he had crawled into a cabinet to escape detection, and the second, he had only saved himself by playing up his bumbling Chinaman stereotype to explain away why he was walking around with a tray full of alkaloids. Eventually, Eng had to spend the night in the lab, working in the dark and dodging the guards to complete his sabotage. On the other side of the double-edged sword was Eng's station chief, who was not happy with Eng's latest reports. To be the real hero in the war against cancer, Eng had to keep everyone from making the breakthrough, and that included his own scientists back home. In China, it was almost a point of pride to steal someone else's work for your own, something Eng was certain had been occurring since he was first placed on Riggs' team. It's why his last few reports had detailed the poor performance of the fusarium mycotoxin, while at the same time, he had hinted strongly that alkaloids were the way to go. That people would probably die didn't concern Eng in the least. People died all the time in China. Life there was hard and short and quickly forgotten when it was gone. The state saw to that. China was a land where families are destroyed on a whim, a place where love was secondary to need, and a nation where personal honor rarely reaches maturity. It's a country where backstabbing and climbing over the warm corpses of your recent colleagues is a proven method of advancement. Next door, in Japan, billion-dollar deals could be concluded on a handshake. But Eng knew that in China, a 1,000-page contract was simply an excuse to find loopholes. This sort of thinking breeds a form of selfish individuality that would be toxic in any other country. In China, it was a way of life. 3. John Burke. "You'll need to find a sitter," the admissions nurse said with a lift of one shoulder. After personally overseeing 41 patients, she was too tired to do more. "I ain't got no money for no sitter," Burke lied. He had plenty of money. However, there was no way he was going to trust some stranger to watch over his baby girl. "What about when you kick off?" a voice inside him said. "Where's Jamie gonna go then? Who'll watch over her?" He still had no idea. His was a family of deadbeats, while Amy Lynn's kin had disowned him. He was practically shitting himself over the idea that his daughter would end up in a fuck-all foster care when the cancer finished doing its number on his lungs and sent him to ride out all eternity in a cheap pine box. There'd be no teak casket for him. They was for martyrs who could gin up a 100-person funeral service. Pine was for fellows like John, who could only attract people who he still owed money to and were there for one last shot at getting paid. "She can sleep in my bed. I can do stretching out on the floor." He had slept on worse. "Mr. Burke, that's not how this facility is being run. We won't have people sleeping on floors like vagabonds." The admin nurse was stout and thick, almost the size and shape of a refrigerator. Her hair was the color of iron and cut short. If it wasn't for her dress and the name tag that read Melinda Evans, Burke would have thought she was a butt-ugly man. "Then maybe this facility ain't right for me." He stood to leave, and he wasn't bluffing. He had zero faith in a cure that he understood to be no more than jock itch powder in a test tube. He was there on account of the money, and since he'd already been paid, "Y'all have a nice day." "Wait! Hold on, Mr. Burke, you can't just leave," Mrs. Evans insisted. "Why not? I done spent all the money you sent me." Another lie. The $10,000, along with Amy Lynn's insurance money, was sitting in a trust account that couldn't be touched by anyone, including him, until Jamie turned 18. Burke reckoned that if by some miracle he got a cure in him, he'd just go on back to work. The world was always in need of a good mechanic. "It's not the money, Mr. Burke. It's the fact that we have an honest-to-God cure for cancer on our hands." "Y'all got a cure for cancer, but y'all can't round up another fuck-all cot or nothing?" Just then, he remembered his promise about cursing, and he glanced out at the waiting room where Jamie was parked on a row of cold hospital chairs, swinging her feet a foot above the floor. She seemed very small, and her skinny legs looked thin to the point of appearing brittle. Mrs. Evans followed his gaze. She took a deep breath and sighed in defeat. "I'll see what I can do, but I don't think they'll let you keep her in your room." She picked up the phone and dialed and explained, and then dialed and explained again. She got nowhere. Her immediate supervisor could be heard to scoff into the phone before offering to lend John $50 for a sitter. Ron Blair, the trial recruiter, gave up the number of one of the kitchen staff who had a sister who did daycare for a reasonable fee. The head nurse, a woman with 2 master's degrees and a blood pressure that was spiking near 180, yelled, "Are you kidding me?" and then slammed the phone down. "Everyone's under a lot of pressure," Mrs. Evans said. "You tried." John stood and had to grab the back of his chair as his head went light and his chest constricted. It was only a momentary thing, and he took as deep a breath as he could, making a wheezy noise like a shot-up bagpipe sitting in a mud puddle. "Y'all have a good evening." Wait, I got one more person to call. She seemed so distressed that he sat down again, stretching his legs out in front of him. Jamie wasn't the only one who looked brittle thin. Burke's faded jeans hung off him, and his old work shirt was so baggy he looked like a boy who'd raided his daddy's closet. Just about done in, he thought, and still no one to watch over Jamie. The thought, a long day of driving, the disease chewing him up and spitting him out, had exhausted him. He dropped his chin to his chest, just thinking he would close his eyes for a moment. 30 minutes later, he woke as Dr. Lee, brusque and short, harried to the point of being rude, came in. "This does not constitute an emergency," she said after Mrs. Evans explained the issue. To Burke, she asked, "Where is the child's mother?" Burke blinked in slow, steady beats as his mind tried to come to grips with being kicked out of a dead sleep. Before he answered Dr. Lee, he glanced into the waiting room to see Jamie playing with another little girl. The two seemed like a matched set, equal in size, both pale and blonde with coltishly slim legs jutting from their pretty dresses. They looked ready for church. In his grease-stained Levi's, Burke might have been a bare step up from a hobo, but he made sure to keep Jamie properly clothed. He turned back to Dr. Lee and spoke in a flat tone. "She did. The cancer what got her 2 years ago." Twee's mouth came open for half a second, expelling nothing but a stunned sound. I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't change the fact that we can't have extraneous personnel living in the rooms with the patients. We can help you find someone to watch the child. I'm sure there are a few daycare facilities around here. We aren't all that far from the city, after all." "But he doesn't want to use the admissions nurse started to say. Dr. Lee interrupted. "Mrs. Evans, it's a sad truth, but sometimes we don't always get what we want." "That's about what I thought," Burke said, getting up. This time he forced himself to ignore the dizziness in his head and the ache in his chest, which made each breath, each second of his life, a chore. "Come on, Jamie, we gotta get moving on." She looked disappointed that her playtime was being cut short, and at the same time pleasantly surprised. "Did you get fixed already, Daddy?" Up close, the twinness between Jamie and her new friend failed. The little girl smiled up at Burke, showing a rich man's set of teeth, straight and white. Jamie's were already yellowing, and she'd be needing braces to close up the gaps in her ranks. The little girl also had perfect hair. It wasn't just cut, it was styled, and framed her face, making her look like an angel. Jamie's blonde hair was limp and cut at right angles to box in her face, the limit of John's haircutting ability. The little girl's perfect smile slid away when Burke said, "I don't think there ain't no cure, darling." "Mr. Burke," Dr. Lee hissed as she hurried to catch up to him, "I can assure you there is a cure, but we have rules. The CDC has rules regarding this sort of thing. There are certain toxins involved that may not be healthy for children to be around." "What about her?" John pointed at Jamie's friend. Dr. Lee glanced once at Maddie Rothschild. "She's different. That's the granddaughter of Edmund Rothschild, the man who fronted the money for all of this." Burke smiled. "So, she's rich, and so the rules don't apply. Typical." No, that's not it at all," Twee replied. She was having trouble grasping how a man, who was clearly in the end stage of cancer, could walk away from a cure. It was mind-boggling. "Yes, Mr. Rothschild has a separate facility for his daughter, but Maddie still won't be allowed in the same room. You see, we have to take special precautions against any pathogen with a measurement larger than .001 micron." She thought that was perfectly clear. However, John's brows came together to form a line across his forehead. "No disrespect, Doc, but you may know spores and viruses and microscopes and all, but you sure as hell don't know people. Telling me the rich got it better ain't exactly no surprise." He started again to the lobby doors, but stopped when Twee cried out, "But there is a cure! You can't walk away from it!" There were quite a few people in the lobby. 2 guards at the front desk, trying not to appear as bored as they felt. Chuck Singleton with his back to the far wall, where he could keep one eye on the elevators and another on the clock over the guard desk. Dr. Wilson, who had stopped in mid-stride to respond to a text sent by his wife. She was unnaturally afraid that he was cheating on her, and had texted and called 8 times that day. Ms. Robbins, chatting with one of the radiologists and wondering if his hair was real or if it was a rug. They all stopped and stared at Twee, who only then realized how loud she had been. Her voice had echoed along the pristine white walls and the dust-free glass. She'd even been heard down the hall where the secretaries in the admin offices all raised their eyebrows. Burke shook his head. So you say. People been selling snake oil since Adam and Eve. If there's different rules from one to another, then I'm a-guessing there's going to be different results, too. And we both knows who'll end up holding the short end of the stick. He jerked a thumb at his own chest. She glared at the insinuation. You are being obtuse, clearly, purposely so, and you're being offensive. Perhaps it would be best if you did leave. Her voice carried to every corner of the lobby, and now people didn't even pretend not to have heard. Dr. Wilson hurried over. Did I hear someone mention snake oil? I have a case of it out in my car. Over the 20 years he'd been an oncologist, Wilson had developed a soothing presence. It was hard to be upset when he unfurled his broad grin in your direction. Twee calmed, slightly. Still her words were clipped as she explained John's irrational fears. What Mr. Burke is feeling is normal, Dr. Wilson said. Doctors don't seem to realize how many times we are just flat out wrong. I had one patient who'd received 16 different diagnoses before she found out that she was dying of endocrine pancreatic cancer. Each of her previous doctors were 100% certain of their diagnoses, and each was 100% wrong. This affects the patient's view, especially those in a terminal situation. It drains the hope out of them. But this time, Twee started to say. Burke scoffed. But this time y'all got it, right? Sure. His skepticism was so obvious that even the two little girls, who were now almost an afterthought to the adults, caught it and shared a look. Right or wrong, Mr. Burke, this is your only chance, Twee said, practically begging now. Yes, she needed him to flesh out her trial. However, it was also clear to her that he couldn't last out the month without help. He was so bad off, swaying in place with sweat running from beneath his ball cap, that she was on the verge of offering to watch the child during the evening when little Maddie Rothschild spoke. She can stay with me. We can do a sleepover. It'll be okay, Mr. Burke. We'll just be in the big cabin. It's right nearby to the hospital. Burke had seen the newly built houses on his way in. They didn't seem like cabins to him. Each was twice as large as his house back home, and the largest was like a mansion. Asking permission first would have been nice, Miss Robbins said, cocking an eyebrow at Maddie. She wasn't going to argue too much. She had not been looking forward to entertaining Maddie single-handedly for the entire week. But since you've offered already, I don't see why we couldn't have a guest, as long as it's okay with Mr. Burke. Before Burke could spit, Jamie had him by the hand and was begging, Can I please? I ain't had no sleepovers in forever. Burke wavered, both in his mind and in his body. He staggered a little before righting himself. Well, I don't know. I guess it'll be okay. If it ain't all that much of an imposition, and if y'all's got the room. We have 6 bedrooms, Maddie assured him, holding up 6 little fingers. And 2 of them are empty. But I think we should build a fort in the entertainment room. What do you think, Jamie? We have all sorts of extra blankets. The girls fell to planning, and Burke was stuck with the real possibility that he could actually be cured. It was slightly unnerving. 4. Chuck Singleton. Chuck watched the little scene in the lobby with a level of understanding that none of them docs could possibly comprehend. They weren't living with death practically hanging on their arm or constantly looking over their shoulder like some overeager spy. They were able to sneeze without wondering if this was the little cold that would trigger pneumonia and then death. Chuck felt like he spent every day with a cartoon piano hanging over his head, suspended by an unraveling length of rope. When you live like that, it made little things huge and giant things small. He could see what the sick fellow valued, and it wasn't his own fish-belly white skin either. It was the little girl, and who would take care of her in the here and now. For Chuck, the big thing was seeing Stephanie Glowett smile one more time. He was sure that when death punched his ticket, he would miss icy beer on a summer's evening after work, and the feel of a woman's breast as he ran his hand up her shirt when she weren't wearing no bra. And he knew he would miss all those Friday nights he got shit-faced with his friends down at Black Eyed Pete's. But he knew what he'd miss most of all was Stephanie's smile. He was tall and lean, with a strong jaw and wide shoulders. There had been plenty of women before Stephanie, but there had never been that instantaneous connection before. Whenever he looked her way, he felt something he would have been embarrassed to admit to the good old boys back home. He was in love. This was why he had taken up residency in a little beach motel in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. Although Steph lived 10 minutes away, they'd only see each other 3 times in those 14 days, and 2 of those times were under the unpleasant glare of Winnie Glowitz, who was always hovering around her daughter, setting a new standard in overprotectiveness. It was also why he had hung about in the lobby of the hospital all day long. He'd been the first patient to check in at a minute after 9 that morning, and since then, he'd kept a long vigil, watching as hundreds of people came in and out of the hospital. Of all those people, 37 truly caught his eye. He could spot others of his kind easily. It wasn't just that they were frail and sickly, it was also because they were the only ones who wore their fear so openly. Most people who came in through the gleaming lobby doors marveled at the newness and the opulence of everything, like they were stepping into one of them fancy New York hotels. Not so the patients. Most of them cowered as if the building was about to fall on them. They didn't pause to gaze up at the marble walls adorned with Renaissance prints. They didn't look at the gilded sconces and fixtures, or the intricate tile that matched the soft squares of carpet. Instead, in a hunched posture, they scurried through security, holding their x-rays and body scans close to their chests, as if afraid someone would possibly want to steal them. They eventually went in to see Mrs. Evans, whose makeup, hair, and overall appearance slowly degraded throughout.